Learn with me, Mrs. Sullivan. It's history lessons from the story Coat of Many Colors by Dolly Parton. The story Coat of Many Colors is autobiographical. Autobiographical means it was written about a person telling about events from their life. So the person who wrote it is the person who actually experienced the events that are described in the story. Dolly Parton is a singer-songwriter, and this actually started as an autobiographical song, which was released in 1971. The story Coat of Many Colors describes Dolly Parton's young life and a specific incident in it when she gets a new coat made by her mother. Here is Dolly, and here are some of her brothers and sisters and her father. And we can learn a lot about the way that they lived from this book. So let's look more closely to see what kind of history lessons we can learn from Coat of Many Colors. The biggest thing we can relearn from this story is about how they were reusing materials in clever ways. Early, they called it reusing. Today we might call it recycling. So we're going to look at some images from a replica, a recreation of Dolly Parton's childhood home at her amusement park called Dollywood. In front of the replica of her home is this sign. This cabin is a replica of the Parton home place where Lee and Avi Lee Parton raised Dolly and her 10 brothers and sisters. The replica cabin was constructed by Dolly's brother Bobby, and the interior was reproduced by her mother Avi Lee, so the inside was decorated by her mom. Most of the items on display are original family treasures. The original cabin still stands at its location in Locust Ridge. So we get to see some real things from inside their home in this replica, and they moved it here so that lots of people could enjoy it. This slice of history. Here's a photo of the dining room and a little bit of the kitchen, and you can see the clever reuse of materials in the newspaper that's used as wallpaper. This is great because the cabin's made out of wood, and there might be little places in between the boards where some cold air could sneak around. So by putting newspaper up on the walls, you're making insulation. The insulation can keep the home warmer. And not just extra insulation, but it also brightens up the room. So the newspaper on the wall provides extra insulation, and it also brightens up the room because it's a lighter color than the wood turns after it's been exposed to the air for a while. You can see here the wood on the chairs and things, it gets quite dark, so that the newspaper on the wall really helps to brighten it up. Also, you can add more newspaper as needed, and you can even select which parts of the newspaper you think are the most pleasing to look at. So what a great reuse of materials. Next to the stove is the pantry where you store ingredients, and you can see under-counter curtains made from feed sacks. A feed sack is a giant sack of food for an animal or feed for an animal, and you can see them here that this is Swan Feed is the company, and you can see a picture of a swan here on the sack. Now it's great to reuse these because they're very large, they're made out of fabric that is good quality, and so it's a perfect thing to reuse, and it even has a nice picture of a swan on there. So reusing a feed sack or the sack that flour that was used for baking came in was very common. Such a clever way to reuse materials. This lovely dress is made from reused flour sacks. So a giant sack that the flour for baking bread and cakes came in a sack that was decorated with a pattern. Let's find out a little bit more about that. So feed sacks and flour sacks were popular items to be reused as fabric for sewing things. And in 1939, Kansas Wheat, when they realized women were using their sacks to make clothes for their children, the mills started using floured fabric for their sacks so the kids would have pretty clothes. And that was pure kindness. The label would wash out. In this picture, the kids are wearing regular flour sacks. Almost looks like a costume. And you can see the big logo on the front. But here you can see this guy, and he's moving a bunch of flour sacks. And you can see all these different types of patterns that are on the bag, on the fabric of the bag. And this part here, right here, looks like Sunbonnet Sue is the brand. These words were made out of a different kind of material, so it would bleach out as you washed it, and you wouldn't see the name anymore. You would just see the print. We'd see the print there, and so that they could have some nice clothes. So what a great idea for everyone. So repurposing sacks to make articles of clothing was super common. Here's a lot of examples of clothing that were made out of flour sacks. And here's an advertisement that tells us it is amazing what can be made from maple leaf flour bags. Smart clothes for the family, smart things for the home, and they can be made easily and quickly. So everyone was reusing or recycling these flour sacks to make other things out of them. There was even a flour mill that named itself Gingham Girl Flour, and their bags were made out of gingham fabric, which is this kind of fabric, these little kind of checkers. And you can see here two girls that maybe have clothes made out of Gingham Girl Flour Company sacks. Pretty cool. So reusing those flour sacks, reusing newspaper, what great ways to cleverly use your materials. Let's find out one more way. Quilting is another way to reuse fabric. This is how Dolly's mother reused the fabric that she got in the story. Quilting's been around for thousands of years. What you do is you layer the pieces of fabric and you sew them together, and you sew layers of them on top of each other, and you can create wonderful patterns and designs, and you can make a warm garment, something to wear, or a blanket. Here's a photo of the world's oldest pants. They are 3,000 years old, and you can see they are made of different pieces of fabric sewn together or quilted. Especially here where you would sit down if you're riding a horse, you might want a little extra padding. So there's some extra quilting there. So quilting has been around a long time. These are some examples of patchwork quilts. That's the type of jacket that Dolly's mother made for her. Patchwork, patching together little pieces of fabric into a quilt. And quilting can be any design that the quilter can imagine. The quilter gets to make art, and many of these designs have names so that quilters know what you're talking about, especially with these patchwork quilts. Let's look at some other types of quilts people make. Here's an example of an applique quilt. In this quilt, the background is one piece of fabric, and smaller pieces of fabric in all different colors are appliqued and sewn on to the large piece of fabric to create a picture like this applique quilt. Another type of quilt is called the crazy quilt. And you can see the shapes are kind of all different kinds of shapes, and there's a lot of different kinds of materials that might be used in a crazy quilt. For example, this one actually uses a ribbon that someone won in 1886. And sometimes pieces of fabric that have a little bit of a picture. This one has a pom-pom on it, and there's some embroidery as well. That's these stitches here. So they're just a crazy quilt. Anything the quilter can imagine, that's what they're going to do. Now you can see these quilts in the replica of Dolly's childhood home. And you can see that someone was very good at patchwork quilt making. So we have this patchwork quilt here. This one actually has this kind here that's called the log cabin pattern. And then there's another quilt here, one here. There's one here in the crib. This looks like the design called wedding rings, I think, with circles intertwined. So someone had some good experience making quilts. So I think her mom knew exactly what she was doing when she put those pieces together to make the wonderful coat for Dolly in the coat of many colors. What a clever way to reuse the fabric to make something new. Ultimate recycling. I hope you enjoyed history lessons from Coat of Many Colors. Thanks for watching Learn with me. Please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and I'd love it if you'd hit that notification bell to find out when a new video comes out. As a working teacher, they're not coming out constantly, but you might like to know exactly when they do.